Okay, Year 11, so this video is revision or a tutorial for B2. In today's tutorial we're going to be focusing on cells and simple transport. Okay, so the basics. So all living things are made up of cells. So animals are made up of cells, plants are made up of cells. They're the building blocks of all life. Now, because the cells need to carry out slightly different functions, they have different organelles. Now if we look at a little bit closely at the plant and animal cell, we can see this is the animal cell and this one is the plant cell. Now we can see that they share some features. So they both have a cell membrane, a cytoplasm, a nucleus, ribosomes and mitochondria. Now you can also see that they also have things that they don't have in common. So for example, the chloroplast, the vacuole and the cell wall are all organelles that are only found in plant cells. So if we think about what some of these organelles do inside a cell, so first of all, the cell membrane, that basically controls what is going to go in and out of the cell. So things like oxygen is going to diffuse into the cell, things like carbon dioxide are going to diffuse out. We also have the cytoplasm. Now the cytoplasm is this grey area here, and that's the jelly-like substance, and this is where the chemical reactions take place, so things such as anaerobic respiration. They both have a nucleus, so this is where the genetic material is stored. It is also the control centre of the cell, not the brain, not. We then have ribosomes. Now ribosomes are often represented by dots, and ribosomes are where protein synthesis takes place. We also have mitochondria, which often look a little bit like this. We can put one in here, and the mitochondria are the powerhouses of the cell. So this is where aerobic respiration takes place and provides energy for the cell. We then have the chloroplast. You can see they're green, they contain chlorophyll, and chlorophyll traps the sunlight, okay, for photosynthesis. We then have the vacuole, which contains cell sap and keeps the plant rigid and turgid, and also the cell wall, which is this orange layer here, the outer supporting layer of a plant cell, which helps give it support. So let's just check if I've remembered that. So things they have in common: nucleus, cytoplasm, cell membrane, mitochondria and ribosomes. The nucleus contains the genetic material which controls the activities of the cell. Cytoplasm, chemical reactions take place here, such as anaerobic respiration, and reactions here are controlled by enzymes. Okay. Cell membrane controls the movement of substances in and out of the cell. Mitochondria, most energy is released by aerobic respiration here, and ribosomes are where protein synthesis happens here, including where enzymes, which are proteins, are manufactured. Okay, just to remind you again, parts of cells, organelles that are only found in plant cells and algal cells are the cell wall, chloroplast and permanent vacuole. So the cell wall strengthens the cell, chloroplast contains chlorophyll which absorbs the light energy for photosynthesis. The permanent vacuole is filled with cell sap to help keep the cell turgid. Okay. So what I want you to do now, if you don't want to just watch all the video through, is pause the video and have a go at drawing a plant and animal cell, and then see how many of the plant parts or the organelles can you write down, how many functions can you write down. Okay, so as well as plant and animal cells, you're also expected to know about bacteria and also fungi such as yeast. Now if you have a look at this cell, you can see that it's different from a plant and an animal cell in that it has no distinct nucleus. Instead, it has its genetic material free in the cytoplasm and also circular DNA called plasmids. You can also see that it's got a flagella, okay, which helps give it motility so it can move, and also a slime capsule, and this basically protects the bacteria. Now you'll notice that there are ribosomes. They contain cell membrane, cytoplasm, and also a cell wall, which is similar to a plant cell. If we look at yeast, which is a single cell organism similar to bacteria, it's different to a bacteria in the fact that it contains a nucleus. Okay, but similar to a plant cell, I guess, in the fact that it has a cell wall, and similar to plant and animal cells in the fact that it has a cytoplasm and a cell membrane. Now, these organisms are able to respire both aerobically and anaerobically. And essentially, what we have is when yeast respire anaerobically, they use glucose, and this makes ethanol plus CO2 and energy, and it can be used in brewing. So that's if yeast respires anaerobically. Whereas if bacteria respires anaerobically, so that's without oxygen, it produces a slightly different chemical. So what it produces is lactic acid, and this is bacteria. Okay, and the lactic acid can be used for producing things like yogurt, because it helps to sour the milk. So what I'd like you to do again is pause the video. How are bacterial cells and fungal cells different? Then rewind it and see how you got on. Okay, so we've had a look at a typical plant and animal cell. We now need to look at how plant and animal cells can be differentiated so that they are specialised for a particular function. So if we have a look at 4 specialised cells, we've got a leaf cell, which can be also be called a palisade cell. And palisade cells can be found in leaves on the upper surface. Now what you'll notice is that they are packed full of chloroplasts, and the chloroplasts contain chlorophyll, which absorbs light for photosynthesis. You can also see this is a root hair cell, which are basically hairs that project off the root. Now this is similar to a plant cell, except you'll notice there's no chloroplasts because it's underground and it can't trap light, and also it's got this long projection, this finger-like projection, which means what it can do is it increases the surface area so it can absorb more water and mineral ions from the soil. We've also got another specialised animal cell. This is a sperm cell. Inside the head it contains enzymes which basically digest through the egg when it's fertilising it. Obviously the sperm has to be able to swim to the egg, so it's got a streamlined shape and also a tail or a flagella to help it swim. And inside this part here, what we find is there's lots of mitochondria, which, remember, produce energy through respiration and which help to give the tail energy to move. Finally, the last one I'm going to talk to you about is the red blood cell. Its function is to carry oxygen around the body. A few things: it's got a thin outer membrane, so oxygen can diffuse in easier and quicker because there's a reduced diffusion distance. Also, there's no nucleus, so there's a larger surface area for absorbing oxygen. Okay, again, pause the video. I'd like you to draw 2 cells, or 3 or even 4, depending on how confident you are, and describe how they're adapted for their function. Then you can rewind it and see how you got on. If you don't want to do the activity, just skip ahead. Okay, so diffusion. Okay, this is the type of transport that you have to know about. So we know that substances have to be able to pass through the membrane. So substances such as oxygen have to be able to pass in, and also substances such as CO2 have to be able to pass out. Now, diffusion is the process that allows this to happen. So particles diffuse from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. So if we look at the diagram here, we can see there's more or a higher concentration of the particles on the outside compared to on the inside. So what happens is that the particles will diffuse inwards. Now, the steeper the concentration gradient, so the bigger the difference on the inside and on the outside, the faster diffusion will take place. So here we can see we've got a much steeper concentration gradient, so diffusion will happen a lot quicker. Okay, because there's many more particles on the outside compared to the inside. Now, if you have a less steep concentration gradient, so there's less of a difference between the outside and the inside, then diffusion will happen a little bit slower. Okay, just get rid of these. So if we now look at some examples then of where diffusion might take place. So diffusion happens in our gut. So if we have a look at the diagram here, we can see our small intestine, and we can see the small intestine is folded into villi to increase the surface area. Now, food particles such as glucose, amino acids are going to diffuse from a high concentration inside the gut into a low concentration in your bloodstream. Again, the lungs contain alveoli. So alveoli are surrounded by capillaries. The blood's constantly moving, maintaining that concentration gradient. So there's always a higher concentration of oxygen in the alveoli compared to in the capillary. So oxygen moves down its concentration gradient. And also there's always going to be a higher concentration of carbon dioxide in the capillary compared to the alveoli. Okay, so these are just 2 examples in animals such as ourselves. So rate of diffusion and gas exchange surfaces such as the villi in the gut and the alveoli in the lungs are the surface area, so they both have an increased surface area. A concentration gradient So essentially, the bigger or steeper the concentration gradient, faster the diffusion. Thickness of the gas exchange surface, so you can see the alveoli has got a very thin membrane, and also the capillary here is a thin membrane, so diffusion is going to be faster. And finally, obviously, temperature. As you increase the temperature, the particles are going to move around faster, so therefore diffusion is going to happen quicker because they've got more kinetic energy. Okay, so your last challenge then, I need you to pause the video. I need you to define diffusion. So remember, diffusion is the process. Give me examples of where it takes place and what factors affect the rate. So that's the end of the video. You can obviously rewind it. If you didn't do the activities the first time through, you can have a go at doing them again. If you found this useful, let me know, either at school or tweet me at hthompson1982.